Chaucer's inheritance, novelty or newness of subject and style were not required of the medieval poet, but rather the infusion of fresh life into a worn convention, into a old convention. Chaucer, no doubt, composed within the traditions, attitudes, and manner of his age. From his earliest poems onwards, his originality is most apparent, clear in the new use to which he turned what had been transmitted to him. The relationship of the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales provides the finest illustration of all. According to Hodgson, the narrative framework for a series of tales had a far reaching ancestry. The medieval world knew the Oriental collections of the Thousand and One Nights and the Seven Sages and Ovid's Metamorphoses, where the device also occurs. Chaucer and his friend John Gower were both experimenting in the late 14th century with the form which some years before Boccaccio had used repeatedly in his Admetto Filocolo. As in the Canterbury Tales, Boccaccio's excuse for the collection, the real purpose, the real aim of the work is the entertainment of a social group brought together by external situations and circumstances. Boccaccio's tales are linked by connecting passages of narrative and conversation. All is under the direction of a presiding officer. Chaucer elsewhere drew considerable inspiration from Boccaccio, but with the narrative framework, the resemblances are superficial. Boccaccio's tales are told in a garden in the Filocolo, in a wooded meadow in Admetto. It was certainly the inspiration of genius when Chaucer made his framework a pilgrimage and introduced all sorts and conditions of men whom he had met and observed in his own busy life. The secular farmers from actual workaday England could be assembled with such a common devotional intention. The different social classes and a range of human types and tastes might reasonably be hoped on such a journey. Chaucer's pilgrims so naturally expose themselves by the tales they chose and by their reactions to the tales of others that sometimes one might well wonder whether the tellers exist for the sake of their tales or the tales for the tellers. Pilgrimages were an important quality feature of medieval life. Chaucer must often have seen a motley company assembling when he lived by London Bridge just across the river from the Tavern, and pilgrim processions riding past his latter house in Kent on their way to Canterbury. Chaucer was also composing within a literary convention. For generations back, a pilgrimage had provided an allegory of the spiritual life. Some 20 years earlier, William Langland in Piers Plowman had first described his vision of the fair field, the earth set between heaven and hell. All sorts of 14th century people, men and women, were busy in it, and they were to rise in a throng, a thousand together, to go on a pilgrimage to seek scent truth, though many of them lost their lives in the way. In Chaucer's own age, Walter Hilton's scale of perfection, illustrated in chapter 21st and 23rd, show spiritual progress in charity and humanity by a probable of the difficulties a pilgrim must overcome on the road to Jerusalem. The idea of spiritual progress, the opinion of spiritual progression is also in Chaucer's mind. The opening of the general prologue prepares or is ready for it. The Knight's Tale tells how this world is but a thoroughfare full of woe, and we been pilgrims passing to and fro. The parson compares the earthly and the heavenly pilgrimage in the prologue to the final tale. And Jesu, for his grace, wit me send to show you the way in this years of Tilka parafit glorious pilgrimage that height Jerusalem celestial. Pity and not wanderlust is the theme of Chaucer poetry. The great period or months for the pilgrimages to Canterbury were December, when Thomas A. Becket was murdered, on 29th December 1170, and July, when he was formally canonized 1174. But the poem is set in a springtime, the season, as Christian Latin poets had long told, when God's restoration of the earth symbolizes his restoration of man's restoration of man through the virtue of the passion and resurrection. Chaucer includes full information to mirror us how his men and women conducted their traveling, secret traveling of life according to status